The fluorescent light above the break room sink had been flickering for 11 days. Rosa Delgado had counted. She counted things like that. The number of days a maintenance request went ignored. The number of crackers left in the sleeve she kept in her locker. The number of hours between the last paycheck and the first bill that came due. Counting was how she kept her grip on a life that had been trying, slowly and without apology, to slip out of her hands for the better part of 3 years. It was 10 minutes past midnight on a Wednesday when she sat down in that break room at Riverside County Clinic, poured herself a cup of coffee that had been burning on the burner since 8 o'clock, and ate half a flour tortilla she'd wrapped in foil that morning and tucked beneath her stethoscope. She had 40 minutes before she needed to be back on the floor. She used 10 of them just sitting there, both hands around the cup, staring at the middle distance the way people do when they are too tired for thinking and too awake for sleep. She was 42 years old. Her feet hurt every day now, not just at the end of a shift, but from the moment she stood up in the morning. A deep, dull ache that started in her heels and moved upward into her calves by noon. She'd been a licensed vocational nurse for 14 years, had worked this clinic for 9 of them, and had spent the last 3 working double shifts on every weekend she could get approved because the regular pay, $22.40 an hour, was not enough. Was never enough. Had not been enough since the morning she woke up to find her husband Damien's side of the closet empty, and a text message on her phone that read, simply, "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." He had taken the savings account, $6,800, and a woman named Tricia from the parts warehouse where he'd worked, and he had left Rosa with 2 children, a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of San Antonio, a credit card carrying $5,200 in debt that bore both their names, and a 2014 Hyundai Elantra that needed a new alternator with a frequency that bordered on insult. Their son Marco was 15 now. He had his father's jaw and his grandmother's stubbornness, and he'd responded to the divorce by getting very quiet and very responsible in a way that broke Rosa's heart, because no 15-year-old boy should have to be responsible. So he loaded the dishwasher without being asked. He walked his sister to school on the mornings Rosa worked the overnight. He did not complain about the apartment or the food or the shoes that were getting tight on his feet. He just absorbed and adapted, the way children of struggling households always did, quietly and at great internal cost. Their daughter Sophia was 7. She had Rosa's eyes, dark and warm and always moving, and she drew pictures constantly on the backs of grocery receipts, on the paper placemats at the diner where they went for birthdays, in the margins of her school notebooks. She drew houses, always houses, sometimes with dogs in the yard, and sometimes with gardens, and always with a sun in the corner, the way young children draw them, a circle with lines radiating outward like a promise. Rosa looked at Sophia's drawings sometimes when she couldn't sleep, and felt something complicated move through her chest, something that had no clean name. Love and grief, and the particular frustration of wanting more for your children than you can currently provide, which is its own kind of helplessness. She had applied for a second job 3 months earlier at a medical staffing agency and was told her availability was too limited. She had looked into refinancing the car loan and was told her debt-to-income ratio made her ineligible. She had asked her supervisor about a pay raise and been given a printed copy of the clinic's salary review schedule with the next window circled in pencil. April. It was November. The apartment cost $1,150 a month. Rosa brought home, after taxes and the $187 monthly installment on the credit card debt, on somewhere between $2,600 and $2,900 depending on overtime. After rent, utilities, groceries, the kids' school expenses, and the minimum payment on the car insurance, she had enough left over each month for approximately one emergency, one unexpected thing, before the math stopped working. In September, Sophia had needed glasses, $340 with the clinic's basic insurance plan. That month, Rosa had not paid the electric bill on time and had been charged a $45 late fee that she couldn't absorb. So she had gone to her brother Hector and borrowed $100 with the intention of paying him back by December, which she was increasingly uncertain she could do. This was not despair. She was clear about that distinction. She was not drowning. She was swimming in water that was deeper than it should have been, that was colder than it should have been, and she was swimming it largely alone, but she was not sinking. She had her children. She had her job. She had the specific, hard-earned dignity of someone who had never once stopped getting up. But she was tired. Deeply and comprehensively tired. And sometimes, sitting in a break room at 10 past midnight with burnt coffee and half a tortilla and 11 days of a flickering light above her head, the tiredness felt less like a condition and more like a companion. Something she'd stopped noticing the way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator. Present, constant, unremarkable. She had no idea that the letter was waiting. It came on a Thursday morning, slipped through the apartment's mail slot while she was sleeping, and it woke her because the sound of the mail slot snapping shut had been wired into her nervous system after 3 years of bracing for overdue notices. She lay in bed for 1 full minute, deciding whether to get up, then got up. Most of what came through that slot was junk, or bills in the particular envelopes that looked like they were trying to appear official without committing to it. This one was different. White envelope, business weight, the return address printed in small, clean font. Law offices of Garza and Reyes, 1804 Victoria Street, Laredo, Texas, 78040. She didn't recognize the name. She didn't know anyone in Laredo except for... And the thought arrived slowly, surfacing from somewhere she hadn't looked in a long time, except for her great-uncle Evaristo. Tio Varo, who was 91 years old and had, as far as Rosa knew, been living in the same small house on the south end of Laredo since before she was born. She opened the envelope, standing in the hallway in her scrubs from the night before, hair still flattened from the pillow. The letter informed her, in the measured and slightly apologetic language that lawyers use when breaking news they cannot predict the reception of, that her great-uncle Evaristo Rosa Delgado had passed away 12 days earlier, at the age of 91, at home, without suffering, in the early morning hours of a Tuesday. That his estate was being administered by the firm of Garza and Reyes, per his instructions. That his survivors had been notified, and that a reading of the will was scheduled for the following Saturday at 10 in the morning at the offices on Victoria Street. That Rosa's presence was requested, as she had been named in the will. At the bottom, in slightly smaller type, a note. Please be advised that Mr. Delgado left specific instructions regarding a particular bequest intended for you. He asked that you be present in person for the reading. Rosa read the letter twice, then stood in her hallway for a long moment doing nothing. Tio Varo, She had met him 4 times in her life that she could recall with any clarity. Once at her grandmother's funeral when Rosa was 9. A thin, quiet man who stood at the back of the church and did not speak to anyone, who gave her a piece of hard candy from his jacket pocket and said in a low voice, "You have your grandmother's eyes, mija." Once at a family reunion in Corpus Christi when she was maybe 14, saw him when he sat at a picnic table alone and read a paperback book through most of the afternoon. Once at her parents' 25th anniversary party, where he arrived with a card and a bottle of Mexican brandy and left within the hour. And once, she had almost forgotten this, when she was in nursing school, when her mother was sick and the family was gathering, and Tio Varo had appeared at the hospital waiting room and sat with Rosa for 2 hours without speaking much. Just present. The way some people knew how to be present in a crisis without requiring anything from you. He was a man she had known and yet not known. He had worked for the Texas-Mexican Railway for 38 years as a dispatcher. She knew this because her father had mentioned it occasionally, usually in the context of explaining why Tio Varo never came to family events. He worked the night shift his whole life. He got used to being alone. He had never married, had no children, had, as far as anyone in the family knew, no close friends. Just the house in Laredo and the decades before that at the dispatch office and whatever filled the hours in between. The family's prevailing opinion of Tio Varo was affectionate but dismissive. El raro, the odd one, the quiet one. Not unkind, just absent, not from physical distance alone, but from some deeper remove that made him feel like a figure in a photograph rather than a person in a room. She called in a favor from her neighbor, Mrs. Cantu, who was 68 and retired and had sat with Marco and Sophia during crises before, and she drove the 3 hours to Laredo on a Saturday morning with the radio on and the windows down and the tentative, cautious feeling of someone approaching something they don't fully understand. The law offices of Garza and Reyes occupied the 2nd floor of a downtown Laredo building that had seen better decades, its facade the pale yellow of old plaster, its stairwell smelling faintly of floor wax and humidity. The attorney, a man named Oscar Garza, who appeared to be in his early 60s and had the air of someone deeply accustomed to managing other people's grief, met Rosa in the hallway before she entered the conference room. He shook her hand and held it a beat longer than a formal handshake required. "Ms. Delgado, thank you for coming. So I want to prepare you. Your family is already inside." She understood from his tone what that meant. Inside the conference room, her uncle Felipe, Tio Varo's surviving nephew, who was 67 and had a real estate office in McAllen and had never missed an opportunity to position himself at the center of family decisions. His wife Graciela, their son Andres, 34, who sold cars and dressed like he was always on his way to a dealership event. Rosa's brother Hector, 45, who worked at a food distribution warehouse and had borrowed the $100 from her pocket to give her and had, in recent months, developed the habit of speaking to Rosa in the tone one used with someone who was not quite managing. Hector's wife Connie, their aunt Dolores, 78, who had been Tio Varo's closest relative by proximity, if not by affection, who lived 40 minutes from Laredo and had apparently been the one to find him. And Rosa's cousin Marisol, Dolores's daughter, who had cleaned out Tio Varo's house in the days after his death and had informed various family members via a group text message that the house contained nothing worth fighting over. They were polite to Rosa when she came in, the politeness of people who had already been talking before you arrived and have decided on the shape of things. Attorney Garza read the will with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many hundreds of times. The house, a 3-bedroom on Maclovio Longoria Street, assessed at $178,000, encumbered by no mortgage because Tio Varo had paid it off in 1997, went to Uncle Felipe, who nodded slowly as if he had expected this and found it satisfactory. From the truck, a 2009 Ford F-150 160,000 miles, needing work on the transmission, went to Andres, who said all right in a way that communicated he was not particularly pleased. The contents of the house, the furniture, the appliances, the books, the tools, the kitchen items, were to be divided among the surviving family members at their discretion, with the exception of one item, which would be addressed separately. Tio Varo's savings account, held at International Bank of Commerce in Laredo, contained $4,100 and some change. This sum, after legal fees, was to be divided equally among all surviving nieces and nephews, Felipe, Dolores, Hector, and Rosa, which amounted to approximately $800 each. There was some rustling at this, not disappointment exactly, but the recalibration that happens when numbers confirm what everyone had already suspected. Then Attorney Garza cleared his throat and looked down at the document before him, and then up at Rosa. "The final item in Mr. Delgado's estate," he said, "is described as follows. 1 tin dispatch case, olive drab, approximately 14 inches in length by 9 inches in width by 6 inches in depth, bearing a stamped serial number on the underside, secured with a padlock, kept on the shelf above the workbench in the rear storage room of the property. This item is to be transferred to Rosa Elena Delgado and to her alone. Mr. Delgado's instructions specify that no other family member is to open or examine the contents of the case. He further specifies that the padlock key will not be provided, and that Ms. Delgado must choose, on of her own volition, whether and when to open the case herself." There was a brief silence. Then Hector said, "He left her a box. Not unkindly, just with the straightforward bewilderment of someone confirming what he'd heard." "He left you a box?" Marisol repeated, and her voice carried the particular inflection, not quite contempt, not quite pity, but something hovering between them, that Rosa recognized from years of being the family member who had needed things, the one who had called Hector for the $100, the one who had, at various points, asked for grace periods on her share of the family expenses at their mother's care home, the one who was always, in the family's unspoken accounting, slightly behind. "I saw that case," Marisol continued, turning to the table generally, not as if Rosa were no longer quite the primary audience. "When we were clearing out the back room, it's one of those old military surplus things, the kind they used to sell at the Army/Navy store for $10. It's dented. The lock is completely rusted over." I shook it. She paused. "It sounds like papers. Old papers. Railroad forms, probably. Work orders from 1974. Uncle Felipe made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Work orders from 1974, he said, almost admiringly. The man kept his railroad forms for 50 years and left them to someone. "Maybe there's a key to something else inside," Andres offered, in the tone of a man attempting generosity. "Like a safety deposit box." "From 1974, Connie said. "The banks don't keep boxes that long," Hector said. He looked at Rosa with an expression she knew well. the one that carried genuine concern for her and also the faintest undercurrent of relief that the situation was not more complicated. "I'm sorry, Rosa. I think Tio Varo was maybe not completely himself at the end." "Dolores, didn't you say he'd been getting confused?" Aunt Dolores sighed. "He was 91. "Exactly," Attorney Garza said quietly. "Mr. Delgado was evaluated by his physician 6 months before his death. His mental capacity was confirmed to be fully intact at that time." He said it without emphasis, but Rosa heard it land in the room. His instructions were very specific and were provided to this office in writing 18 months ago, well within that window. Another small silence. Then Marisol said, "Well, at least the house went somewhere useful." Rosa did not respond. She was looking at the document in Garza's hands, at the careful language of it, at the words Rosa Elena Delgado, and to her alone. She was thinking about the hard candy in Tio Varo's jacket pocket at her grandmother's funeral, about the 2 hours in the hospital waiting room when he had sat with her and asked nothing, about the paperback book at the family reunion, the one he'd been reading alone at the picnic table while everyone else gathered in groups. She had never thought to ask what he was reading. She thought about it now. The case was brought to her by Attorney Garza after the others had left. It had been kept in a locked storage room at the office per Tio Varo's arrangements, delivered there by Marisol after the house was cleared. It was sitting on Garza's desk, wrapped in brown paper that had been taped with the neat precision of someone who took wrapping seriously. Rosa lifted it. The weight surprised her. It was heavier than she'd expected. Not dramatically so, not inexplicably so, but more than the dead weight of stacked papers. There was something dense about it, something that didn't shift when she tilted it slightly, something settled and solid beneath whatever was inside. She didn't say anything about the weight. She set it back on the desk. "He left a note for you," Garza said. He handed her a sealed envelope, her name written across the front in handwriting that was small and careful, and even the handwriting of someone who had spent a career making entries in logbooks. "He asked that you read it privately." "Not here. I'm not with family." Rosa put the envelope in her purse without opening it. "Ms. Delgado." Garza paused, seeming to consider his words. "I knew your great-uncle for 11 years. He came to this office the first time to update his will after his health began to decline, and he came back 5 times over the following years to make adjustments and additions. He was one of the most deliberate men I've ever worked with." Another pause. He did not do things accidentally. Rosa looked at him. "What does that mean?" Garza looked back, and his expression was careful, professionally neutral, but with something behind it. "It means what it means," he said. "I hope you'll take good care of whatever he left you." She drove home with the dispatch case in the trunk, wrapped in its brown paper, and the sealed envelope in her purse, and the weight of the day settling around her like something physical. She called her brother from the parking lot of the apartment complex that evening. She called him because it was reflex, because Hector was the person she called when something had happened, and she needed to say it aloud to make it real. That was the nature of the relationship, the oldest habit of siblings. The need to share the unprocessed event before you understood it yourself. She told him about the case, about the attorney's words, about the fact that the padlock key was not being provided and that she would have to choose whether to open it herself. She kept her voice measured, informational. Hector was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you think is in it?" "I don't know." Railroad papers, like Marisol said. I don't know. It could be nothing. Rosa! His voice was gentle, and she hated that it was gentle. Hated the soft concern in it that was also, she knew, the sound of someone managing their expectations on her behalf. Tio Varo was a sweet old man, but he was also, El Raro. He had his ways. Maybe he thought he was leaving you something important, and it was just sentimental to him. Old documents, an old photograph, something like that. Maybe. I just don't want you to get your hopes up. She let that sit on the line for a moment. I'm not getting my hopes up, she said. I'm going to sleep, Hector. She hung up and sat in the car and looked at the lit windows of the apartment above her, where Marco was watching Sofia, where the television was probably on, where there was dinner to make and homework to check and a morning to prepare for, on all the machinery of her ordinary life running exactly as it always ran. She went upstairs, made quesadillas, helped Sofia with a worksheet about animal habitats, listened to Marco talk briefly about a history project on the Mexican-American War, the first genuine enthusiasm she'd heard in his voice in weeks, and felt the particular painful love of a mother watching her child find something that makes him come alive. She put Sofia to bed. She checked Marco's homework. She showered and stood in the bathroom afterward in the steam with her hand on the towel rack, looking at her own face in the mirror. Then she went to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened Tio Varo's letter. Rosa, you don't know me well. That is my fault, and I won't apologize for it because apologies from the dying have a tendency toward the theatrical, and I was never a theatrical man. But I want you to understand something before you open what I've left you, so that you approach it with the proper frame of mind. I watched your family from the distance that suited me for 50 years. Not because I was indifferent, but because I learned early that I was better at watching than participating, and that this quality, though it made me a poor relation and a strange guest, made me a very accurate judge of character. Your father was a good man who made some poor decisions with money and compensated by working hard for his children, which is a reasonable trade. Your Uncle Felipe is a competent man who has spent his entire life confusing competence with merit, which is not a reasonable trade, but a common one. Your brother Hector is an affectionate man who is afraid of discomfort, and this fear makes him smaller than he would otherwise be. And you are the kind of woman who works a double shift and does not complain about it, who borrows money she needs and pays it back when she can, who raises her children alone without requiring anyone to acknowledge how hard it is. I watched you at your mother's bedside in that hospital for 6 days, and I saw what you were made of, and I decided then what I was going to do. I spent 38 years as a railroad dispatcher. In that time, I earned a modest living and spent almost none of it. I had no wife, no children, no vacations, no expensive habits. I had, instead, time and patience, and a natural understanding of how value works. That value is not where most people look for it, that the things the world dismisses are often the things the world has simply failed to examine. What I am leaving you isn't railroad papers. I will not tell you more than that in this letter, because I want you to open the case yourself, in your own time, and I want the discovery to be yours. All I ask is that you do not tell your siblings what you find until you have spoken with a lawyer, not Garza, who is a good man, but a small-town attorney, but someone who handles estates of significant complexity. Do this before you tell anyone else. Trust me on this, as I am asking you to trust me on nothing else. You are the right person for this. That is not sentiment. It is a conclusion I reached after 50 years of observation. With respect, your great-uncle Evaristo Rosa sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she finished the letter. The apartment was quiet. The clock above the stove read 11:43. Through the ceiling she could hear, faintly, the sound of the upstairs neighbor's television. She read the letter twice more. What I am leaving you is not railroad papers. She got up and went to the bedroom closet, where she had put the dispatch case on the shelf, still in its brown paper wrapping. She stood in front of the closet with the light on and looked at it. She did not open it that night. She didn't open it the next night either, or the night after that. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment, which was partly true. She was also, and she recognized this, even as it was happening, afraid. Not of what she might find. She'd let herself hold the possibility that Tio Varo meant something real by not railroad papers. I had let herself sit with that possibility in the dark, the way you hold something fragile. But of the other thing, of opening it and finding, despite everything, nothing. Of his letter being the well-intentioned confusion of a 91-year-old man who had lived alone too long. Of the particular cruelty of hope confirmed as foolishness. She had been foolish before. She had believed Damien when he said they were building something. She had believed her Uncle Felipe when he promised, at her mother's care home intake meeting, that the family would handle the fees together. She had believed the staffing agency when they said her application looked strong. She had learned, across these failures, to be careful with hope, to keep it at arm's length, to examine it for structural defects before she let it hold any weight. The case sat on the shelf 3 days. 4. On the 5th day, Hector called. He had apparently spoken to Marisol, who had spoken to Uncle Felipe, and the consensus that had formed between them, the family's informal committee on Rosa's affairs, was that the case probably contained some kind of documentation relating to Tio Varo's service with the railroad. Perhaps retirement records. Perhaps old pay stubs he'd saved, the way some men of that generation saved every piece of paper that proved they had worked, that they had been real, that their labor had been acknowledged somewhere. "We think you should open it," Hector said, "and if it's documents, we can help you sort through them, in case there's anything related to the estate that Garza might need." "Garza has everything he needs," Rosa said. "The estate is settled." "Right. Oh, but Hector, I'm just saying we're here, if you need help." She understood what help meant in this context. It meant we want to know what's in it. Not maliciously, not with any particular agenda, just with the reflexive entitlement of family members who had decided, without stating it plainly, that Rosa's good fortune, such as it was a shared matter. The way they'd decided the $100 she'd borrowed from Hector was a symbol of her general precariousness, rather than a specific and temporary need. "I'll open it when I'm ready," she said. She heard Marisol's voice in the background. She hadn't realized Marisol was there. "Is that her? What does she say?" "Hector. She says she's going to open it when she's ready." Marisol, not bothering to lower her voice. "What is she waiting for? It's a tin box with old papers." Rosa hung up. She called her friend Letitia that evening, the one person she trusted to receive information, without immediately organizing it into something useful for themselves. Letitia was a radiological technician at a hospital across town, a woman who had survived a divorce of her own, and 2 hurricanes, and a year of chemotherapy, and had emerged from all of it with a specific, earned quality of calmness that Rosa found stabilizing. Rosa read her the letter over the phone. Letitia was quiet for several seconds. "Rosa," she said. "Yeah. What is he talking about?" "I don't know." He said, "What I am leaving you is not railroad papers." "I know. What is that?" Letitia paused. "Okay, how heavy is it?" Rosa thought about it. "Heavier than it should be, than papers would be." Another pause. Open the box." "I know." "Rosa, open the box." "I'm scared." "Of what?" "That it's nothing." Letitia made a sound, a breath that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. "Listen to me. A man who spent 38 years making sure trains ran on the right tracks, at the right times, wrote you a letter from beyond the grave, telling you very specifically what his inheritance is not. And you're scared it's nothing." A pause. "What does your gut say?" Rosa looked at the closet door from the kitchen where she was sitting. "That he meant every word," she said. "Open the box." She did it on a Tuesday night, 6 days after returning from Laredo. The kids were asleep. It was 10 minutes past 11. Rosa sat at the kitchen table with the dispatch case in front of her, unwrapped now from its brown paper. Sitting in the kitchen light for the first time. She looked at it properly. It was olive drab, the specific shade of green that is not quite green, the color the U.S. military used on everything from 1940 onward because it was practical and invisible and made no claims about itself. The metal was tin over steel, dented in 3 places along the long side, from what looked like decades of contact with other things. Shelves, other equipment, the accumulated small collisions of a long working life. The hinges were brass, gone dull. The hasp that held the padlock was slightly bent, whether from age or from Marisol shaking it, Rosa couldn't tell. The padlock was rusted completely. Not orange rusted, not surface rusted, but the deep reddish brown of iron that has been oxidizing for a very long time, possibly decades. There was no question of the key fitting into it, even if she had the key. The keyhole was sealed with rust. On the underside, as Garza's document had noted, a serial number stamped into the metal. She looked at it without recording it. Just numbers. She had borrowed bolt cutters from her neighbor Mrs. Cantu's son, Ricky, who used them in his landscaping work and kept them in his truck. She'd told him the lock on her storage unit was rusted over, which was close enough to true that she'd said it without much discomfort. She positioned the bolt cutters on the padlock's shackle, the curved part, where the metal was thinner, and applied pressure. The padlock resisted for 3 seconds. Then the shackle gave with a sound like a single, clean note, and the lock fell in 2 pieces onto the kitchen table. Rosa set the bolt cutters aside. She sat with her hands in her lap for a moment, looking at the unlatched case. Then she opened it. The smell reached her before the image resolved. A specific, layered smell. Dry and faintly chemical, and underneath it something older. Something like paper and time. The smell of things that have been sealed away from air for years and have developed their own atmosphere in the dark. The inside was lined with a thick wool felt, the kind used in military equipment cases. Olive green faded to gray at the edges. And on top of the felt, filling the top layer of the case, were papers. Folded documents, flat, organized into 3 rubber-banded stacks, arranged side by side. The rubber bands were brittle from age, cracked and nearly disintegrated, barely holding their bundles. The paper was the heavy cream stock of formal documents, and not the thin yellow of railroad work orders. Rosa's stomach dropped. Her first thought, the one that arrived before she could intercept it, the one that Hector and Marisol would have recognized with grim satisfaction, was, it's papers, after all. But then she looked more closely. The top document on the nearest stack was folded twice. The crease was sharp and old, and where the paper was folded, where the edge was visible, she could see printing. The formal block printing of official financial documents, the kind that carried seals and serial numbers and language she was not yet close enough to read. She reached in and lifted the stack, carefully with both hands, and placed it on the table beside the case. She looked into the case again. And then she saw it. The bottom of the case was wrong. Not wrong in a way that was immediately obvious. Not wrong like a false bottom in a cheap mystery novel. The kind with a visible seam and a hidden spring. Wrong in a subtler way. The felt lining inside was 2 inches deep on all 4 sides. But on the bottom, it was. She counted the inch markings with her eye against the outside dimensions of the case. Less than half an inch. Which meant the bottom of the case was not the bottom of the case. There was another 1.5 inches of space below the felt. Space that did not correspond to the interior. Space that had no explanation unless the felt was covering something. Rosa's hands had gone very still. She reached into the case with one finger and pressed gently on the center of the felt-lined bottom. It gave slightly, like a door asking to be opened. She pressed on the corner nearest the hinge, then the opposite corner. The third corner, the one nearest the broken padlock hasp, depressed and then caught on something, and there was a sound, very soft, that was either the click of a latch or the sound of her own breathing stopping. The felt-covered panel lifted away from the bottom of the case on a hinge Rosa hadn't seen, swinging upward to reveal the space beneath it, a space that was not empty. Rosa stared at what was inside. For a moment, she did not understand what she was seeing. The brain does this when it encounters something it has no prepared category for, when the data coming in does not match any existing pattern. It stalls. It loops. It reaches for the nearest available frame of reference and finds nothing that fits. Then she understood. And her hands, which had been so still, began to shake. The brain is not designed for this. That was the thought Rosa kept returning to in the days and weeks that followed, when she tried to reconstruct what it had actually felt like to be sitting at that kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, looking at what was inside the false bottom of a rusted tin dispatch case. The brain is a pattern recognition machine. It looks at incoming information and searches its catalog for the nearest match, the closest known shape, the most familiar frame. And when the information has no match, when what you are looking at exists entirely outside the catalog, the brain does not respond with wonder or fear or joy. It responds with a kind of flatness, a suspension, a processing delay while the system tries to build the new category from scratch. Rosa sat at that table in suspension for what she later estimated was nearly 2 minutes. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She simply looked. Then she reached into the false bottom with both hands and began to lift things out. The first thing she removed was a bundle of documents, held together not with rubber bands. The rubber bands above had rotted, but with a thin strip of leather tied in a simple knot. She unknotted it carefully, set the leather aside, and unfolded the top document. It was printed on heavy cream paper in the formal typeface of financial institutions, At the top, an eagle seal above the words, United States Treasury. Below that, in block letters, bearer bond. Series HH, a denomination, a series number, a maturity date. And below those, more sheets, more bonds, each with its own denomination. I'm its own serial number, stacked and organized and preserved in the controlled, dry atmosphere of a sealed case for what appeared, based on the issue dates, to be between 20 and 45 years. Rosa had a vague, half-formed understanding of what bearer bonds were. She had encountered the term in a passing way, the way you encounter terms that exist at the edge of your professional and financial knowledge without ever needing to step fully into them. Bonds, government bonds, things people with money bought in the mid-20th century to preserve and grow it. Things that paid interest. Things that still paid their face value and all accumulated interest to whoever held them. She stared at the denominational figure on the first bond for a long time. Then she moved to the next one. And the next. She stopped counting after 7, till she set the bundle on the table and reached back into the false bottom. The second thing was a chamois leather pouch, the kind used for polishing silver, drawn closed with a simple cord. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, small enough to fit in the palm of one hand, but weighted in a way that was dense and concentrated. She held it for a moment without opening it. Then she loosened the cord and tilted the pouch carefully over the table. What slid out were stones, rough stones, not polished, not cut, not shaped into anything, raw and irregular, each one a slightly different size, the largest about the size of a large grape, and the smallest barely bigger than a pea. They were the color of very old ice, translucent in some places, cloudy in others, catching the kitchen light and breaking it in ways that flat glass did not. Rosa looked at them. She picked up the largest one and held it between 2 fingers in the light. She had never held an uncut diamond before, had no basis for comparison, had no way of knowing with certainty, sitting at her kitchen table in San Antonio at 11 in the evening, whether she was looking at industrial gravel or something that would eventually be appraised at values she had no current vocabulary for. But she looked at the way the light moved through it, and she thought of Tio Varo's letter. The things the world dismisses are often the things the world has simply failed to examine. She set the stone down carefully and did not pick up another. The third item was a second bundle, larger than the first, tied with the same leather cord, containing what appeared to be stock certificates, formal paper documents with corporate seals and signatures, each one representing a specified number of shares in companies whose names Rosa knew in some cases and did not know in others. Some of the names were familiar in a historical sense, names of companies that had been absorbed or renamed or restructured over the decades until what remained of them was something entirely different and far larger than what had existed on the date the certificate was issued. She did not try to calculate anything. She stacked the certificates neatly and set them aside. The fourth item was an envelope, smaller than the leather bundle, containing a single folded document. She opened it. It was a deed, a property deed, formally recorded in the name of Evaristo Rosa Delgado, for mineral rights on 340 acres of land in Pecos County, Texas. The deed was dated 1969. The property description listed section, township, and range coordinates she had no way of interpreting without a map. At the bottom, a notary's stamp and 2 signatures. The fifth and final item in the false bottom was a second letter. Rosa looked at the envelope for a long time before she opened it. Her name was on the front again, in the same small, careful handwriting. Below her name, a single additional line. Read this with a clear head and a quiet room. Take your time. Rosa, you found the compartment. Good. You are, as I said, the right person for this. I want to explain what you are holding, not because I distrust your ability to understand it eventually, but because I know that shock distorts perception, and I want you to see clearly. The bonds. I purchased United States Treasury bearer bonds beginning in 1961 and continuing through 1981, the year before they were discontinued. I purchased them in small increments, 1 or 2 at a time, over 20 years, using funds I had saved by living on approximately a third of my dispatcher's salary and investing the remainder. Bearer bonds pay to whoever holds them. They require no registration, no name, no provenance beyond possession. They were, for a man in my circumstances, an ideal vehicle. The face values are printed on each bond. The accumulated interest is substantial. An estate attorney or financial specialist can calculate the current value. I have not listed the total here because that figure changes with time, and I want you to have it calculated precisely rather than approximately. The stones. These are raw diamonds. I purchased them over the course of 31 years from a dealer in Mexico City named Arturo Rojas, whose son now operates the business. I went to Mexico City 9 times between 1965 and 1996 and bought stones each time. I chose uncut stones because they were cheaper than cut stones, because they were easier to transport and store, and because the value of a diamond does not depend on whether a jeweler has shaped it yet. The largest stone weighs approximately 4 carats in its raw form. Have them appraised by a certified gemologist. The contact information for the Rojas firm, if it is still necessary, is in the address book taped to the inside of the case lid. Look under R. The certificates. The stock is held across 7 companies. Some of these companies still exist under their original names. Some have been acquired, and their stock converted into shares of the acquiring entity. Some have split multiple times. Tracing the current value will require a financial specialist, but I have done this work for you as of my last accounting, which is now several years old. I have noted the approximate current figures in the ledger pages folded inside the certificate bundle. I will say only that I purchased most of these shares between 1958 and 1975, when they were inexpensive, and that I held them without selling for the remainder of my life, because I understood that patience is the one investment strategy that requires no expertise, only discipline. The deed. In 1969, I purchased mineral rights on 340 acres in Pecos County, Texas, from a rancher named Whitfield, who was certain the land was dry. He sold me the rights for $1,200 because he needed the cash and wanted to be rid of what he considered a nuisance. In 1978, the land was leased to an independent oil and gas company. In 1986, they confirmed a productive formation beneath the western portion of the acreage. Royalty payments began in 1987 and have continued since. I instructed that the royalty payments be deposited into a trust account administered by a fiduciary in Midland, whose information is also in the address book under M. I did not spend $1 of this income. It accumulated. Have the trust reviewed by your attorney. Rosa, I do not know exactly what these things are worth today. I know approximately. I know that it is enough to change your life and your children's lives. And, if you choose to use it generously, a great many other things beyond that. I trust you to know what to do with that. One more thing. Your siblings will come when they find out. They will come with lawyers and with claims and with the language of family obligation. They will say Tio Varo was confused. They will say the estate was mismanaged. They will say that you, specifically, are not equipped to handle this. Too young, too inexperienced, too accustomed to poverty to make good decisions about wealth. I want you to know something. I prepared for this. Everything I did carefully, and in writing, and with witnesses. Attorney Garza has an additional document, a supplementary codicil, that addresses the specific legal arguments your family will attempt. I did not tell him what is in this case, but I told him enough to close the doors before they could find them open. Trust him with this much. He knows what to produce and when. Build something good, Rosa. Not because the world deserves it, but because you do. Con cariño y respeto. Tio Varo. She read the letter 3 times. Then she stood up from the kitchen table, walked to the bathroom, ran cold water over her wrists, the way she did when she needed to slow her heart rate in the middle of a long shift, and stood there for 90 seconds with water running over her pulse points and the overhead light buzzing faintly above her. Then she went back to the table, sat down, and looked at everything spread before her. The bearer bonds, the chamois pouch with its rough stones, the stock certificates, the mineral rights deed, the 2 letters, the leather strips that had held the bundles together for years in the dark. She picked up her phone. She did not call Hector. She did not call Marisol. She did not call her uncle Felipe or her Aunt Dolores. She called Leticia. It rang twice. Rosa, it's almost midnight. I know, I'm sorry. I need you to listen to me. A pause. The sound of Leticia sitting up, fully awake the way nurses learn to go from sleep to alert without a middle stage. What happened? Are you okay? Are the kids? The kids are fine. I'm fine. Rosa stopped. Started again. I opened the case. Silence. Letty, it's not railroad papers. Another silence, longer this time. Then quietly, what is it? Rosa looked at the table, at the bonds and the stones and the certificates and the deed and the 2 letters from a man she had never really known, but who had, it appeared, known her. I don't know exactly, she said. I don't know the number. I don't know how to calculate it. She paused. But I think Tio Varo was a very, very different person than anyone in this family understood. Leticia was quiet for a long moment. Rosa. Her voice was careful. The voice she used with patients who had just received news their brains were still in the process of absorbing. Are you sitting down? Yes. Stay sitting down. Don't call anyone else tonight. Don't tell anyone. What did the letter say to do? He said to find a lawyer. Not Garza. Someone who handles complex estates. Then that's what you do first thing tomorrow morning. A pause. Can you sleep? I don't think so. Then make tea. Sit with it. Don't try to calculate anything tonight. Your brain isn't built for this at midnight. Just sit with the fact that something has changed. You don't need to understand the full shape of it yet. Rosa exhaled. I'm okay. I'm serious about the family. Don't call anyone. I know. Rosa. I know, Letty. After she hung up, she made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with it steaming in front of her, everything still spread across the surface, and she did what Leticia had told her to do. She sat with it. She let it be real without trying to make it comprehensible. She watched the kitchen light fall across the chamois pouch, and the bonds and the certificates, and thought about a man who had sat alone at a picnic table with a paperback book while his family gathered around him, and had been, underneath the quiet and the distance, building something for 50 years that no one had known to look for. She did not sleep until nearly 4. The attorney's name was Esperanza Vela. Rosa found her through 3 hours of careful research the following morning, and sitting at the library 2 blocks from the apartment, while Marco was at school and Sophia was at a neighbor's, using the library's internet and a yellow legal pad and the same methodical approach she used when researching medication interactions for patients. She was not looking for the biggest firm or the most expensive name. She was looking for specific expertise: estate law for high net worth individuals, experience with physical asset valuation, a track record in contested estate cases. Esperanza Vela's firm occupied a floor of a downtown San Antonio office building that was unremarkable from the outside and quietly sophisticated within, the kind of space that communicated competence without extravagance. Vela herself was 53, a compact woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, who moved through her office with the focused efficiency of someone who billed in 6-minute increments and took that seriously. She received Rosa with professional neutrality. She listened to the situation with no expression that gave anything away, made notes on a yellow pad similar to the one Rosa had used at the library, and asked 4 questions, each one precise and clarifying. At the end of Rosa's explanation, she said, "Did you bring the documents?" Rosa had brought everything, photographed and copied twice on the library printer before she came, originals in a fireproof bag she'd bought that morning at the hardware store. She opened the bag and laid it on the table piece by piece. Vela was a lawyer, not a financial analyst, but she had spent 23 years working with estates of considerable complexity, and she recognized what she was looking at before Rosa had finished laying items out. She did not reach for anything. She looked at the bonds first, then the certificates, then the deed, then the pouch. She did not open the pouch. She looked at Rosa. "Have you told anyone in your family about this?" "No." "Good. That continues." She sat back. "I'm going to need to bring in specialists, a financial analyst for the bonds and certificates, a certified gemologist for whatever is in that pouch. The mineral rights will need a petroleum engineer and a title attorney to assess properly." She paused. "This is going to take several weeks of careful work before I can give you any numbers. And numbers won't be the beginning. Numbers are what we get to after we've established that everything is legally yours and defensible." "The letter said there's a supplementary codicil." Vela nodded. "I'll contact Garza in Laredo today. Get the full documentation." She looked at Rosa directly. "How are you?" The question caught Rosa off guard. It was not the question she had been expecting. "I don't know," she said honestly. Vela nodded again, as if this were the correct answer. "That's appropriate. We'll work on the practical side of things and let you figure out the rest at your own pace." She capped her pen. "One thing I need you to understand. Until we have a clear assessment of what you have and its provenance and value, do not mention specific items or amounts to anyone. Not your brother, not a friend, not a neighbor. If someone asks, 'The estate is still under review,' that is true, and it is all they need to know." Rosa thought of Letitia, who already knew the shape, if not the numbers. "A close friend knows I found something. She hasn't told anyone. Keep it there for now." The weeks that followed were organized by a discipline of silence that Rosa had not known she was capable of. She went to work. She made lunches and checked homework, and drove Sophia to a dentist appointment, and helped Marco study for a chemistry exam. She attended one meeting with Vela and her assembled team of specialists, then another, then a third, this one conducted across a conference table covered in spread documents, with a financial analyst named Torres, no relation, who had the particular stillness of a man who had learned, over many years, to manage his reactions to very large numbers. The bearer bonds were verified first. They were real, properly issued, properly preserved. The total face value, combined with all accumulated interest, calculated through the date of authentication, was confirmed at $47.3 million. Rosa received this information sitting in Vela's conference room with her hands flat on the table in front of her, fingers spread, and she nodded and said, "Okay." And the financial analyst looked at her over his glasses with the slightly uncertain expression of a man accustomed to more dramatic responses. The gemologist, a woman named Chen who had flown in from Houston at Vela's request, examined the stones from the chamois pouch over the course of a full day and returned with a report that listed each stone by estimated carat weight, clarity grade, color grade, and market value range. The total, at conservative appraisal, $27.8 million. The stock certificates required the most time, tracing 40 years of corporate mergers, acquisitions, splits, and conversions through the paper trail Tio Varo had maintained in his ledger. Pages was work that took 2 analysts 2 weeks. When the final accounting was presented, it reflected a total current value, after all conversions and at current share prices, of $84.6 million. The mineral rights were last. The fiduciary in Midland, an older man named Castillo, who had administered the royalty trust since 1991, and who seemed relieved, in a way that suggested the weight of undeposited obligation, to finally have a living claimant, confirmed that royalties from the Pecos County formation had been accumulating for 37 years. The trust account held $21.4 million. Current annual royalties, based on the productive formation's output, were approximately $600,000 per year. Vela called Rosa to the office to review the consolidated figures on a Tuesday morning, 3.5 weeks after their first meeting. She slid a single sheet of paper across the conference table. Rosa looked at it. She had been running numbers in her head for weeks, the partial figures adding as they came in, each one arriving with the same processing delay as the initial discovery, each one requiring its own adaptation before the next could land. But seeing them listed together on a single sheet of paper in the neat columns of a financial summary document was different. Total confirmed asset value, $181.1 million. Annual income from mineral royalties, $602,000. Rosa sat with the paper in front of her and did not speak for a long time. Vela let her. Finally, Rosa said, "He did this alone, for 50 years, without telling anyone. Yes, on a dispatcher's salary. He lived on very little. Every account we've traced shows a pattern of consistent, disciplined accumulation over several decades. He didn't speculate. He didn't take risks. He bought things that he believed had enduring value: government bonds, raw stones, shares in companies with sound fundamentals. And he held them. He never sold. He just held and let time do the work." Rosa thought about the house on Maclovio Longoria Street, the 2009 Ford F-150 with 160,000 miles, the $4,100 savings account that had seemed like the sum total of his life's financial accomplishment, the paperback book at the family reunion, 38 years on the night shift making sure trains ran on time. He never bought anything for himself, she said. Vela looked at her with an expression that was professionally composed, but carried something beneath it. He bought something for you. It was Marisol who found out first, because it was always Marisol. Rosa did not know, and would never know with certainty, exactly how it happened. The most likely explanation, pieced together afterward, was that Marisol had a cousin by marriage who worked as a file clerk at the county recorder's office in Midland, and that the activity around the mineral rights deed, the transfer of the trust account into Rosa's name, the updated fiduciary documentation, the title search, generated paperwork that a file clerk with the right last name and a habit of paying attention might notice. The specific details were less important than the result. Hector called on a Thursday afternoon. Rosa was at work, mid-shift. She saw his name on her phone screen and let it go to voicemail. When her break came, she listened. "Rosa, it's me. Listen, I've been getting some calls. From Felipe and Marisol. They're saying there's something going on with a trust account in Midland. Some kind of mineral rights thing. Connected to Tio Varo's estate." A pause, and then his voice shifted into something she recognized as the specific register he used when he was afraid of what he was about to say. "Rosa, if he left you something significant, something you haven't told us about, we need to talk. Felipe's talking about lawyers. I don't want this to go that way. I want to figure it out as a family. Call me back, okay? Please." Rosa listened to the message once. Then she called Esperanza Vela. "They know something," she said. "I don't know how much." "It was always a matter of when," Vela said. Her voice was calm, the calm of someone who had been expecting this phone call. "Here's what's going to happen next. Your Uncle Felipe is going to hire an attorney. He's going to file a claim contesting the bequest on grounds of testamentary incapacity or undue influence, probably both. Your brother may or may not join it, depending on how much pressure Felipe applies. Your cousin Marisol will be the fuel." She paused. "I've been preparing for this. We're ready. But I need you to understand, before we go to court, they're going to come to you first. In person. They're going to use the language of family. They're going to tell you they just want fairness. And it's going to be hard to hear." Rosa stared at the corkboard of patient charts across from her in the break room, the same break room with the same flickering light. Still flickering. "How hard?" she said. "Hard enough that I want you to have my cell number in your hand before they arrive." They came on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after Hector's voicemail, which meant they had spent 3 weeks organizing themselves into something that resembled a unified front, which was, for this particular family, a significant administrative achievement. Uncle Felipe arrived first, in his Buick, wearing the navy blazer he wore to closings. Beside him, his wife Graciela, who had the expression of someone who had not wanted to come, but had been given insufficient grounds to refuse. Behind them, Hector and Connie, Hector's face arranged into the specific configuration Rosa associated with him, trying to look reasonable while feeling guilty. And behind them, Marisol, who did not try to look anything in particular, who arrived the way she always arrived, as though she was already certain of the outcome, and found the preceding steps mildly tedious. Rosa met them at the door. She had not invited them in yet. She had called Esperanza Vela from the bathroom while Marco kept the kids occupied in his room, and she had the attorney on the phone in her shirt pocket. The call live, the audio capturing everything. Rosa. Uncle Felipe's voice was warm, the warmth of a real estate agent managing a difficult seller. You know why we're here. Tell me anyway, she said. He sighed, the sigh of a man performing patience. We know about the mineral rights in Midland. We know there was a trust account. We know there are financial assets connected to Tio Varo's estate that were not disclosed at the reading. He looked at her steadily. We're not here to fight. We're here because we're family, and family doesn't keep secrets from each other. Marisol, we should have been told. Whatever he left you, it was connected to the family estate. We all have a claim. You don't, Rosa said. The directness of it surprised all of them, including her. Attorney Garza administered the estate. Everything was disclosed according to the will. The case and its contents were bequested to me specifically. The contents, Hector said, and his voice carried something pained in it. Rosa, come on. A tin box is one thing. Whatever's inside it, that's a different matter. Nobody knew what was in there. Tio Varo knew. He documented it. He left instructions. He was 91 years old. This was Felipe, his voice hardening slightly at the edge. He was alone for 40 years. He was an eccentric old man who clearly had developed a fixation on one particular niece at the expense of his other surviving family members. He had a psychiatric evaluation 18 months before he died, confirming full mental competency. A silence. A local doctor, Marisol said, in Laredo. A board-certified psychiatrist, retained by his attorney and conducted formally, with documentation. Rosa kept her voice level. I have the report. Another silence. Felipe and Marisol exchanged a look that Rosa recognized. The look of people recalibrating their approach because the first one hadn't landed where they expected. Then Felipe said, Rosa. And his voice shifted into something she hadn't heard from him before, something that had the structure of sincerity, even if she couldn't be sure of its contents. I'm not saying you don't deserve something good. God knows your life has been hard. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm saying that what Tio Varo left, whatever it is connected to this family, to our bloodline, to Grandma Delgado's children and grandchildren. Whatever he built it as a Delgado. You are a Delgado, but so are we. And if there's real money here, Rosa, real money, then the right thing, the fair thing, is to share it. She looked at him, at Graciela, at Hector's guilty, carefully arranged face, at Marisol, and who was watching her with the flat assessment of someone who had already decided on the shape of the thing and was waiting for Rosa to figure it out. She thought about the $100 she'd borrowed from Hector for Sophia's glasses and paid back in 3 installments, and for which she had thanked him 3 times. She thought about the 6 years her mother had been in the care home and the agreement the family had reached about splitting the costs, and the 18 months she had covered Felipe's share, plus her own, because Felipe was having a cash flow issue. She thought about the group text Marisol had sent after Tio Varo died. The house contains nothing worth fighting over. She thought about a man sitting alone at a picnic table with a paperback book for 38 years of summer weekends, watching a family from the comfortable distance of someone who had decided early which one of them was worth something. I'm going to need you to leave, she said. Hector's face crumpled. Rosa, I have an attorney handling this. If you have legal questions, Your attorney can contact mine. She held the door. I'm not angry with you, Hector. I'm not angry with any of you. But there is nothing to discuss on a front porch on a Saturday afternoon, and I'd like you to go. Felipe's expression had gone cool. We'll be in touch through our counsel. That's fine. They left. Not quietly. Marisol said something to Graciela on the way to the car that Rosa chose not to hear, but they left. Rosa stood in the doorway until the last car had pulled out of the parking lot, and then she went inside and closed the door and leaned against it with her eyes shut. From her shirt pocket, Vela's voice. You did well. They're going to file. Yes, give them 10 days. It was 8. The petition arrived through Vela's office, a formal legal challenge, filed by an attorney from McAllen named Breton on behalf of Felipe Delgado, and co-signers that included Hector, and, to Rosa's surprise, and then not surprise, Aunt Dolores. The grounds were exactly what Vela had predicted: testamentary incapacity, undue influence, and the angle that Vela said was the most genuinely dangerous, a claim that the contents of the dispatch case constituted property of the general estate, not of the specific bequest, and should therefore be distributed according to standard intestate succession among all surviving heirs. This last argument was the one that kept Rosa awake, not because she believed it was just, but because it was clever. The case had been bequested. But if a court decided that what was inside the case was not encompassed by the bequest, that the bequest covered the tin and not the treasure, then everything Tio Varo had built over 50 years could be divided 5 ways at the stroke of a judge's pen. Vela laid it out for her in the conference room. It's a creative reading of the probate code, she said. Their attorney isn't wrong that it's arguable. In a strictly technical interpretation, the bequest specifies 1 tin dispatch case and its description. It does not explicitly enumerate the contents. But the letters are powerful, but letters are not legally binding in the same way a will is. Vela paused. This is where the supplementary codicil matters. I called Garza the day you first came to see me. He drove up from Laredo last week. She slid a document across the table. Rosa looked at it. It was 2 pages, formal legal language in the style of will addenda, dated 18 months before Tio Varo's death, witnessed and notarized, filed as part of the official estate documentation with the Garza firm. She read the relevant section twice. I further specify that the bequest to Rosa Elena Delgado, described herein as 1 tin dispatch case, olive drab, bearing stamped serial number, secured with a padlock, kept on the shelf above the workbench in the rear storage room at the Maclovio Longoria Street property, shall be understood to encompass the entirety of said case, including all items and materials contained therein, in any compartment or space within said case, whether visible upon initial inspection or not. All contents, regardless of form, nature, financial character, or value, are bequested in whole and without exception to Rosa Elena Delgado. He had written the word visible. He had written whether visible upon initial inspection or not. He had known about the false bottom. He had known about the contents. He had known exactly what a court might try to argue. And he had closed the door so specifically, so deliberately, using the precise language of the law, that the argument collapsed against it. Rosa set the document down. "But he's been dead for 2 months," she said quietly, "and he's still watching out for me." Vela allowed herself a small, genuine smile. the first one Rosa had seen from her. He filed this codicil 18 months ago. He told Garza at the time that it was a precaution, that he had specific concerns about how certain family members might respond to his estate plan. She paused. His exact words to Garza, according to Garza's notes from that meeting, were, "They will look for the small door I left unlocked. Make sure there are no small doors." The hearing was scheduled 6 weeks after the petition was filed. Vela argued it in a courtroom in the Bexar County Courthouse on a Thursday morning with the compact efficiency of someone who had spent 23 years building cases they believed in. She presented the will, the codicil, the psychiatric evaluation, the 18 months of documentation witnessed and filed that established Tio Varo as a man of full legal capacity who had planned his estate with extraordinary deliberation. Garza drove up from Laredo again and testified in person, brief and clear, about the timeline of the estate planning, the manner of the man he had worked with across 11 years, the specificity of every instruction Tio Varo had ever given him. "He was the most precise client I have ever worked with," Garza said from the stand, his old voice carrying a quality that was not quite emotion but sat close to it. "He never left anything to chance. He never left anything open. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly why." The family's attorney made his arguments. They were technically competent and practically insufficient. The codicil's language addressed each angle directly. The capacity evaluation destroyed the incapacity claim. The undue influence claim had no evidence. Rosa had seen the man 4 times in her adult life, a fact that the attorney for the family inadvertently confirmed when, trying to establish the intimacy of their relationship, he asked Rosa on the stand how often she had communicated with her great-uncle. "4 times in person that I can clearly remember," she said. "We never spoke by phone. We never exchanged letters." She paused. "Until his." The judge reviewed the full documentation and ruled from the bench. The claim was dismissed. The bequest stood in its entirety. All assets contained within the dispatch case, including all financial instruments, mineral rights, and other materials, were the legal property of Rosa Elena Delgado, and the family's attorney collected his papers. Rosa looked at her brother across the courtroom. Hector, who had joined the petition because Felipe had pressured him, who had been avoiding her eyes all morning, who now met her gaze for one moment with an expression that was complicated enough that she didn't try to name its components. She looked away. She was not ready to decide yet what to do with that. Vela filed the final documentation that afternoon. The assets were transferred into a trust structure she had spent the previous weeks building. Rosa as sole trustee, a board of financial advisors to provide oversight and counsel, asset managers for the equity and bond portfolios, a petroleum attorney to handle the ongoing Midland royalties. By the time Rosa left Vela's office that evening, the long work of the past 2 months had resolved into something she could hold in her hands, not literally, but in the way you hold a concluded fact. Solid, finished, no longer provisional. $181.1 million in confirmed assets, plus $602,000 annually from the mineral royalties, plus whatever the market had done in the time since authentication. She sat in her car in the parking garage for several minutes before she could make herself start the engine. She thought about the fluorescent light above the break room sink at the clinic. She had not been back to work since the legal proceedings began, had taken leave she'd accumulated. But she thought about that light the way you think about a detail that has become, without your realizing it, a symbol for something. 11 days before she left. 11 days of maintenance requests, filed and ignored. She thought about Marco's shoes that were getting tight on his feet. She thought about Sophia's drawings of houses with suns in the corners and 3 stick figures holding hands by the door. She thought about a man sitting alone at a picnic table with a book, watching a family he had mostly declined to participate in, keeping his own counsel for 50 years, building something in the dark that no one thought to look for. She had not cried yet. Not once during the whole of it. Not during the discovery or the authentication or the confrontation with her family on the porch or the courtroom or the ruling. She had kept the particular composure she had developed across 14 years of nursing. The composure that was not emotional distance, but rather the deliberate management of emotion in service of function. The thing that let you deliver news and make decisions and keep moving when feeling was a luxury the situation couldn't afford. She cried now. In the parking garage, in the front seat of the 2014 Hyundai Elantra, with 94,000 miles on it, with the engine still off and the garage quiet around her. She cried the way she'd learned to cry. Quietly, efficiently, completely. The grief and the relief and the gratitude and the strangeness of it all moving through her at once, and underneath all of it, present and persistent, the image of an old man's handwriting on cream paper. You are the right person for this. That is not sentiment. It is a conclusion I reached after 50 years of observation. She had not known him, had not known he was watching, had not known that the hard candy at her grandmother's funeral and the 2 hours in the hospital waiting room were part of something larger. Not kindness exactly, but inventory. The careful accounting of a man who had learned to value character the way he valued bearer bonds and raw stones and mineral rights on land everyone else thought was dry. Who had understood that the most undervalued things were often the ones the world had simply failed to examine. She had been that for him. The overlooked asset, the one nobody thought to look at twice. And for 50 years, without telling her, without asking anything of her, and without requiring her to know she was being watched or valued or considered, he had been building her a way out. She started the car. She drove home through the early evening, the city ordinary around her, and went upstairs to where Marco had heated leftover soup, and Sophia had fallen asleep on the couch in her school clothes with a drawing pad across her chest. Rosa stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at her children, her quiet, responsible, expensive-shoed son, and her drawing, dreaming daughter with her colored pencils scattered on the cushion, and felt something settle in her chest that was very large and very quiet, and did not yet have a name. She would find a name for it. She had time now. The morning after the ruling, Rosa woke up at 5:47, the same way she had woken up every morning for 14 years, before the alarm, in the particular dark of the hour before the neighborhood began to move, her body still operating on the schedule of the double shift, still braced for the weight of the day before it arrived. She lay in the same bed, in the same apartment, the same sound of the upstairs neighbor's water pipes running when the shower came on at 6, the same quality of light through the curtains, the parking lot security lamp making a pale orange rectangle on the ceiling that she had stared at so many nights that she knew every crack in the plaster above it. Nothing about the room had changed. Everything else had. She lay there for a while without moving, letting this register, So not trying to calculate or plan or organize, just trying to sit with the fact of it, the way you sit with a large, unfamiliar object that has been placed in a room you thought you knew. You walk around it. You look at it from different angles. You don't rush to decide what it means. She thought about Tio Varo, not the legal version of him, not the testament and the codicil and the authenticated assets, but the human version. The man with the hard candy in his jacket pocket. The man who read paperback books at picnic tables and sat in hospital waiting rooms without asking for acknowledgement, and spent 38 years on a night shift, and came home to a small house in Laredo, and, apparently, to a discipline of building that no one around him had any idea was happening. She tried to picture him at 30 years old, at 40, at 50, and sitting at the same kind of ordinary table in the same kind of ordinary light, making the same careful entries in the ledger he maintained for a collection no one knew existed. Buying a stock certificate, folding a bearer bond, placing a stone in a chamois pouch, each transaction small, each one part of a pattern too large and too patient to be visible to anyone who wasn't looking across the full 50 years of it. She thought about what Vela had said during the final meeting. He never sold. He just held and let time do the work. She had been thinking about that ever since, about patience as a form of investment, about the things you held on to when everything around you said to let go. She had held on to Marco and Sophia through 3 years of parking lots and borrowed money and burnt coffee at midnight, when she had held on to her nursing license and her school loans and her father's memory and the specific, stubborn conviction that she was not a failure just because she was failing. She had held on to the $100 she owed Hector and paid it back in 3 installments, even when it would have been easier to let it go, because she understood in some wordless way that integrity was only integrity when it cost you something. Tio Varo had watched that. From the comfortable distance of a man who needed nothing from the family except the truth of what they were, and he had decided she was worth the wait. Rosa got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window in the early gray light, and looked at the parking lot below. An ordinary view she had looked at 1,000 times and would not look at much longer, and she did not feel the dramatic surge of relief she might have expected, just a quiet acknowledgement. This chapter is ending. Another is beginning. Both things were real, and both deserved to be recognized without rushing past one to get to the other. The first thing she did, the very first transaction she authorized through the trust, was pay off the credit card. $5,227 and some cents, cleared in full from a total asset base of $181 million. The ratio of those two numbers, the smallness of the debt against the enormity of what now stood behind it, was something she did not let herself dwell on too long. It would have been easy to feel the bitterness of it, to let the mind run backward through all the months of minimum payments and careful calculations, and the particular shame of turning a card over to a cashier and hoping the decline didn't come. All of it against the backdrop of what had been sitting in a tin case on a shelf in Laredo while she did it. She did not let herself go there, not because the feeling wasn't real, but because she had learned early in nursing that the past was a room you could visit or you could live in, and living in it was a choice with costs. She paid the card. She closed the account. She sat with the confirmation email for a moment, and then she moved on. She called Marco into the kitchen that afternoon and told him she needed to take him shopping. He looked at her with the expression of a 15-year-old who has been the practical member of a two-person household for 3 years and has therefore developed excellent instincts for when adults are saying more than they are saying. Shopping for what? Shoes, for a start. He looked down at his feet, the ones that had been wearing the same pair for 8 months, that she could see, were tight at the toe, even when he said nothing about it. My shoes are fine. They're not fine. You've been telling me they're fine for 4 months, which is how I know they're not fine. She picked up her purse. Come on. They went to a mall. Not the discount outlet she had been using for 3 years, the one with the bins of last season's inventory and the flickering overhead lighting, but a real mall, with stores that had their own lighting designs and salespeople who asked what you were looking for and brought out multiple options. Marco was uncomfortable from the moment they walked in. She watched him navigate the discomfort, the way he oriented immediately toward the sale rack, the way he picked up price tags first and shoes second, the way 3 years of being the responsible one had calcified into a reflex for managing expectation downward before it could be disappointed. She steered him past the sale rack. He tried on 7 pairs, took his time. She sat across from him in the low store chair and watched him walk in each one, and felt something she recognized after a moment as the particular joy of watching your child be allowed to be a child. He kept gravitating back to a pair of running shoes, gray and white with a subtle design detail on the side, good quality, the kind he would have looked at and walked away from in any previous version of this trip. Those ones, she said. They're... He looked at the price, looked back at her. Marco. Mom. Those are the ones you keep going back to. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice that was trying to be casual and not quite making it. Can we afford these? She held his gaze. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment with those careful eyes that saw too much, and had been seeing it since he was 12, and something in his expression shifted. Some small, held tension releasing, not dramatically, not with any performance, just quietly, the way a fist slowly opens when it's been told it doesn't need to hold on anymore. Okay, he said. He wore them out of the store. Maybe Sophia found out differently. Rosa didn't sit her down and explain. She simply enrolled her in the Saturday morning art studio near the park, a program for children, proper instruction, real materials, a teacher who had trained at the Art Institute in San Antonio and taught with the focused enthusiasm of someone who believed deeply in what she was doing. The first morning, Rosa drove her there and walked her inside. The studio smelled like linseed oil and clay and acrylic paint. And the light came in from a north-facing skylight, the way light in art studios always came in. Soft and even, and without the harsh edges of direct sun. Supply shelves lined one wall, brushes in every size, pencils and charcoal and colored pencil. Paper in a dozen weights and textures, canvases stacked and waiting. So Sophia stopped 3 feet inside the door and looked at the supply wall. She was 7 years old. She stood in the middle of that studio with her backpack on, and her mouth slightly open, and her dark eyes moving across the shelves the way they moved across the pages of books she loved, quickly and with complete absorption, taking inventory of everything at once. The teacher, Ms. Avila, came over and knelt to Sophia's level. Have you painted before? I draw, Sophia said, still looking at the shelves. Houses, mostly, and people. I want to learn perspective. She said the word carefully, like she'd been saving it, like she'd looked it up. Ms. Avila looked up at Rosa with an expression that Rosa would remember for a long time. "She's going to be just fine," she said. Rosa left her there and sat in the car in the parking lot for 10 minutes because she needed the 10 minutes. The apartment lease ran through the end of the year. Rosa did not break it early. She was not, by nature, a person who made sudden moves, and the discipline of patience that Tio Varo had somehow transmitted to her from across 50 years of observation made her want to do things carefully. She gave herself 3 months to find a house, not a mansion, not something designed to declare her transformation to anyone who drove past. Something with 3 bedrooms, a yard, a kitchen window that looked at something besides a parking lot, a school district she'd researched, a neighborhood where Marco could run without looking over his shoulder. She found it in a tree-lined part of the city, a house that had been lived in by a family for 30 years, and showed it the good way. Original hardwood floors, a backyard with an oak that was older than the house, a kitchen with a gas range, and a window above the sink that faced east, so the morning light came in sideways and warm. 3 bedrooms, and a small room off the back that could be a study or a workroom or whatever it needed to be. She bought it in cash. She'd never written a number that large before on anything. Her hand was steady. Moving day was a Saturday in early December. They did not have much. The furniture from the apartment was mostly second-hand and had served its purpose, and Rosa had decided to leave most of it behind and start new. Not expensively, not performatively, just new. She'd chosen rather than acquired by necessity. Marco carried boxes with the efficiency and quiet he brought to everything. Sophia ran from room to room calling out discoveries. "Mom, there's a window seat. Mom, look at the backyard. Mom, can my room be the one with the blue door?" Her voice bouncing off walls that were learning to be theirs. The last thing Rosa brought in was the dispatch case. She carried it herself under her arm, the broken padlock replaced months ago by a small brass hook she'd mounted on the inside of the hasp. The false bottom was permanently open now, the felt lining folded back, the hidden space visible to anyone who looked. She set it on the shelf in the small back room that was becoming her study. Stepped back, looked at it. An olive drab tin box, 14 inches by 9 by 6. Dented in 3 places, brass hinges gone dull. The kind of thing you could buy at an Army/Navy store in 1960 for a few dollars, and not look at twice. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went to join her children in the new house. She called the clinic on a Monday morning in January and spoke with her supervisor, a woman named Garcia, who had been fair to her across 9 years in the particular way of supervisors who liked you, but could only go so far for you within the system they were operating. Rosa told her she was resigning, that she was grateful, that the work had meant something to her, and she hoped the patients would continue to receive good care. Garcia was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay, Rosa?" "I'm more than okay." Another pause. "We're going to miss you." "I know. I'll miss it too." She meant it. There was grief in it. Real grief. Because 14 years of your life is 14 years of your life, regardless of what comes after. And the work itself, the actual tending to people in the specific, physical, unglamorous way that nursing required, had given her something she wouldn't have found another way. She understood bodies. She understood pain and patience and the mechanics of recovery. She understood that healing was not dramatic, It was incremental and slow and required somebody showing up every shift. She filed the paperwork that afternoon. She found out 3 weeks later, through a friend who still worked at the clinic, that the fluorescent light above the break room sink had finally been repaired. The maintenance request had gone through the week after Rosa's last shift. She laughed when she heard this, a real laugh, from somewhere unguarded, the kind that surprised her by arriving. Hector called on a Sunday morning in February. Rosa saw his name on the screen and considered it for 2 rings before she answered. Not to punish him, just because she needed 2 rings to decide what kind of conversation she was ready to have. "Hey," she said. "Hey." His voice was different. She noticed it immediately. The careful quality was gone, the one that came out when he was managing his way through something he didn't fully want to confront. What was left was quieter. "Do you have a minute?" "Yes." He was silent for a moment. She waited. "I withdrew from the petition in the 2nd week," he said. "I don't know if Vela told you." "She told me. I should have never joined it in the first place. Felipe pushed, and I went along because it was easier than standing up to him, which is something I've been doing my whole life, and I'm 51 years old, and I'm still doing it." He stopped, started again. "I've been sitting with that for months. I'm not telling you this to make myself feel better. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it said out loud." Rosa listened. "I wasn't there for you," he said. "The past 3 years. I knew things were bad. I knew you were in that car. I knew about the apartment and the double shifts, and Sophia's glasses. I sent you the $100, and I told myself that was something. And it wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't what a brother does when his sister is drowning." His voice tightened at the edges. "I was embarrassed, not by you, by the situation, by the fact that I didn't know how to fix it, and that bothered me more than it should have. So I kept my distance. And then when the money came out, I let Felipe talk me into something I knew was wrong, because I thought, I don't know what I thought, that there was something owed, that the family should come first." A pause. "But you are the family. You've always been the family. The rest of us just took turns being lousy at it." The line was quiet. Rosa stood in the kitchen of the new house, with the February light coming through the east window, and looked at the oak in the backyard, the one that was older than the house. Something in Hector's voice told her this was real, not performance, not the strategic regret of a man hoping for access to something, but the actual uncomfortable work of a person looking at themselves without the usual flattering filters. It wasn't a complete reckoning. She knew him well enough to know that he didn't fully understand every piece of what he'd done or failed to do, that the apology had edges that hadn't been examined yet. But it was real as far as it went, and Rosa had long ago learned to take honesty in the form it actually arrived in, rather than the form she might have preferred. "I hear you," she said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know." "I know," she paused. "You're not done with me, Hector. Neither am I with you. We just need some time." She heard him exhale, the specific sound of a breath that has been held for months. "Okay." "Okay." She did not hear from Marisol. She did not hear from Uncle Felipe. This was its own information, clearly delivered without the need for translation. There were family members who could, eventually and with difficulty, to locate the version of themselves that was capable of honesty. And there were family members for whom the humiliation of being wrong was more than they could metabolize. Rosa had been around enough sick people to understand that some conditions were treatable and some were chronic, and that the difference was rarely about the severity of the illness and almost entirely about the willingness to do the work. She did not wait for Felipe or Marisol. She did not close the door. She simply turned to face the direction where her life was actually going. The foundation took shape slowly, the way good things tended to, with the patience Rosa had watched Tio Varo model across 50 years of accumulated evidence. She did not name it after herself. She named it the Evaristo Delgado Foundation, because the wealth was his, and the vision was his, and the first principle of it, that unseen value existed in places the world had decided not to look, was his philosophy applied in human form. The mission she wrote herself in a single paragraph at the kitchen table of the new house on a night when the kids were asleep and the oak in the yard was throwing shadows across the grass in the moonlight. The Evaristo Delgado Foundation exists to provide emergency stabilization support to single parents in the medical and caregiving professions who are experiencing housing instability, acute financial crisis, or barriers to continued employment. We operate on the belief that the workforce that cares for the sick and the elderly and the dying is disproportionately female, disproportionately underpaid, and disproportionately vulnerable to the cascading consequences of a single financial crisis, and that stabilizing one person in that position stabilizes their children, their patients, and the communities they serve. Vela reviewed it. The financial team reviewed it. A nonprofit attorney helped with the structural requirements. And then it was real. A legal entity with an operating board, a published mission, a physical address, and the first 3 years of operating costs funded by the mineral royalties from the Pecos County formation. $602,000 annually. Not touched from the principal. Just the income from what Tio Varo had built, flowing forward into the specific kind of crisis he'd watched his niece survive. Letitia was the first person Rosa called after the foundation's non-profit status was confirmed. "It's real," Rosa said. "Oh, you can apply." Letitia laughed the way she laughed when something actually delighted her, the full unguarded version. "I don't need to apply. I have a job and a house and a functioning alternator." "I know, but other people don't." Rosa paused. "I'm going to need help running the intake interviews. Someone who understands the specific texture of what these women are going through. Not from research, from having been there." A long pause. "You're asking me to work for you." "I'm asking you to help me build something. Those are different things." Rosa Delgado. Letitia's voice was warm with something Rosa couldn't fully name but felt clearly. "You know what your Tio bought with 50 years of patience? Tell me. He bought you the ability to buy other people time." Rosa wrote that down. She wrote it on a piece of paper and taped it to the wall above her desk in the study where the dispatch case sat on the shelf. She looked at it every morning when she came into work. He bought you the ability to buy other people time. That was the foundation's actual mission, below the formal paragraph. Time. Just time. The thing no amount of good intention could manufacture when the rent was overdue and the card was declining, and the only option was the choice between eating and the electric bill. Time was what Rosa had lacked. Time was what Tio Varo's patience had finally given her. And time was what the foundation would give to the women who came through its doors, carrying the particular, specific weight of surviving while caring for everyone else. The first year, the foundation assisted 37 families. Not thousands, so not hundreds. 37, because this was real work, done carefully, and with attention to the specific circumstances of each case, because Rosa had sat across from enough intake paperwork as a patient, rather than an administrator, to know that the difference between help that actually helped and help that felt like charity was almost entirely in how much the helpers understood what they were looking at. They provided emergency rental assistance to 19 families, preventing evictions that would have cascaded into school disruptions, job losses, and the particular downward spiral that Rosa knew from inside. They funded childcare subsidies for 11 families, whose caregiving work paid too little and demanded too much. They offered 6 grants for continuing education, LVNs, who wanted their RN, CNAs, who wanted their LPN, people who had started something and been forced to stop by circumstances that had nothing to do with their capability. Rosa read every application herself, not because she didn't trust the intake staff. She'd built a small, excellent team, led by Letitia, who had taken leave from her own job to help get the foundation operational. But because she wanted the discipline of remembering, of not letting the distance between the person who had needed help and the person who now gave it grow wide enough to lose the accuracy of the original view. She knew what it felt like to fill out a form that required you to list your current address when your current address was a parking space in a Walmart lot. She knew what it felt like to sit across from a social worker who was compassionate and limited and trying and ultimately unable to give you what you actually needed, which was not a referral, but a room. She read every application, and she kept that knowledge current, and she let it make the decisions sharp. Marco's college acceptances came in a wave across 3 weeks of March, the spring of his junior year becoming his senior year, 17 becoming 18, in the space of a semester that Rosa watched closely for signs of the strain he'd been carrying for years, finally releasing. He applied to 7 schools. He was accepted by 5. He put Rice University on the list at the last minute, told Rosa he probably wouldn't get in, was accepted in mid-March with a letter that arrived on a Tuesday and sat on the kitchen counter for 2 hours before he opened it. Rosa watched him read it, watched his face. He put the letter down and looked at the window. Then he picked it up and read it again. Then he put it face down on the counter and went to his room and closed the door. She gave him 4 minutes. Then she knocked. He was sitting on the edge of his bed. His eyes were dry, but just barely. He was 16 months from the parking lot and 5 months from graduation, and the whole architecture of the person he'd been building himself into across the years of the hard time. Careful, responsible, practical, always scanning for the next thing that needed managing, seemed to be trying to reorganize itself around the fact that the next thing didn't need managing, that the next thing was actually, finally, good. Rice, Rosa said. Rice, he confirmed. She sat beside him on the bed and put her arm around him and felt him lean into it with his full weight, the way he had not leaned into her since he was 11, and the world had required him to stand up on his own. You did that, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever else changed, that was you. He didn't say anything. Engineering? He nodded. Then, quietly, aerospace. She had not known that. He had been carrying that particular aspiration somewhere private, the way he carried everything he wasn't sure he was allowed to want. Aerospace. Her careful, responsible, self-contained son who had learned to rank their various states of homelessness when he was 13, wanted to build things that left the atmosphere. Rosa pressed her face briefly against the side of his head and didn't say anything for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Rice it is." He cried a little. He turned slightly away so she could pretend she hadn't seen it. She pretended she hadn't seen it. Sophia turned 9 that spring. She had been in Ms. Avila's Saturday studio for 4 months and had graduated, in Ms. Avila's assessment, from drawing houses to designing them, not architecturally, not with technical precision, but with a child's understanding of space and light and the relationship between a room and the person who lived in it that was its own kind of intelligence. She brought Rosa her drawings now and explained them. "This room has the window on the east side, so the morning comes in while you're having breakfast. Fornant, this room has no sharp corners, 'cause they feel anxious. This one is small, but the ceiling is high, so it doesn't feel small." She had a vocabulary for interior space that Rosa recognized as the thing that happens when a child with natural aptitude is given the language to describe what they already instinctively feel. At Sophia's birthday dinner, she announced with the gravity of someone making a formal declaration that she wanted to be an architect when she grew up. She wanted to design houses that felt safe, houses where people knew they weren't going to be asked to leave. Rosa set her fork down. "What made you think of that?" she asked. Sophia shrugged with the casualness of someone who had been thinking about it for months. "When we lived in the car, I used to draw houses because they felt like what I wanted. But now I think I want to build them, so other kids don't have to just draw them." The table was quiet for a moment. Marco said, "That's kind of great, kid." Sophia picked up her fork. "I know." There was one family gathering that year that Rosa attended, a quinceañera in September for the daughter of a distant cousin, a large event in a rented hall with a DJ and a professionally catered meal, and the full extended family of that particular branch of the Delgados assembled in their good clothes. Rosa went because the girl was sweet and had nothing to do with the estate dispute and deserved the acknowledgement. She saw Marisol across the room 3 times during the evening. Each time, Marisol saw her first and then looked at something else. Not hostility, on just the practiced avoidance of someone for whom acknowledgement would require more self-examination than she was currently willing to do. The 3rd time their eyes met, Rosa held the eye contact for a moment, not confrontationally, just steadily. Then she nodded, a single unhurried nod, and turned back to the conversation she'd been having. She did not need anything from Marisol, did not need the apology, the acknowledgement, the eventual arrival at remorse. Maybe it would come. Maybe it wouldn't. That was Marisol's accounting, not Rosa's. Rosa had long since decided that the energy required to wait for the people who had dismissed her to recognize what they'd done was energy that belonged somewhere else, showing 37 families, and a growing intake list, and a boy going to Rice, and a girl who wanted to build houses for people who needed to stay. She left the quinceañera at 9:30. She went home to the house with the oak in the yard and sat on the back porch in the September, warm with a glass of water, and let the evening be quiet around her. A year after moving in, she bought a frame for the one photograph she had of Tio Varo. It had come from Garza's office, copied from a document in the estate file. A small photograph, the kind taken at an official event, showing a man in his early 50s in a railroad company blazer standing at what appeared to be a retirement dinner for someone else. He was at the edge of the frame, not centered, the way people who preferred observation to participation tended to position themselves in photographs. He was not smiling, but his expression had a quality of alert intelligence that Rosa recognized now as what she had always meant when she thought of him as a man paying attention. She put the frame on the shelf in her study, next to the dispatch case. Not as a shrine, not as decoration, just as a presence. A reminder that some things existed beyond the edge of what you could see, that some people were doing important work in rooms you'd never entered and would never know to enter, and that sometimes, rarely, improbably, against all the odds of it going any other way, the work found its way to you anyway. She talked to him sometimes when she was in the study late, working on the foundation's materials or reviewing the annual report. It's not out loud, just in the way you carry on conversations with the dead when their presence is still live enough in your memory to sustain the dialogue. She told him about the 37 families, about Letitia, who had come on full-time as the foundation's director of intake and was better at it than anyone else would have been, about the woman in Houston who had received the emergency rental assistance and had gone back to finish her RN and was now working in a level 1 trauma center and had written the foundation a letter that Rosa kept in her desk drawer because she read it on the days when the work felt slow. She told him about Marco's aerospace program and Sophia's drawing and the house with the oak. She told him about the January morning she had sat in the same dark before the alarm and let the fullness of what he'd given her settle into her without trying to calculate or plan, just receiving it. The way you receive something you've been handed that is almost too large to hold, but which you hold anyway, because that is the only appropriate response to a gift of this magnitude. She told him she understood now what he had been doing at the picnic table with the paperback book, that watching people with patience and discernment was its own kind of love, that the man who had sat at the back of the church at her grandmother's funeral and given her a piece of hard candy and said, "You have your grandmother's eyes," had already been watching, had already been taking inventory of what she was made of, had already, perhaps, begun to build toward her. She wrote him a letter, on cream paper, heavy stock, the same kind he had used, by hand, in handwriting that was not as small or as careful as his, but was her own. She told him everything she had told him in the study conversations. She folded it and put it in the dispatch case, in the hidden compartment, where 50 years of patient wealth had waited in the dark for the right person to find it. It seemed like the right place for it. The day Marco left for Rice was a Saturday in August, a late summer day in San Antonio, where the heat was an almost physical presence, the sky a flat white blue, the air so still that the oak in the backyard didn't move. They loaded his things into the back of the new car, a reliable SUV, practically chosen, a nothing that declared itself, and stood in the driveway for the leaving moment that parents have been standing in for as long as there have been children old enough to leave. Sophia hugged him for a long time. He tolerated it with the embarrassed warmth of older siblings everywhere. Then he turned to Rosa. She looked at him. This person who had been 11 years old when Damien left and had responded by getting quiet and responsible, who had loaded the dishwasher without being asked and walked his sister to school in the mornings and had not complained about the shoes or the food or the car or any of it, who had absorbed and adapted with a grace that no child should have been required to develop, and had developed it anyway, magnificently. "Mom," he stopped. "I know," she said. "I wouldn't have been able to do this without... You would have found a way." She held his face in her hands the way she had when he was small. "You were finding a way before I knew we had one. That's yours. That has always been yours." He nodded, not trusting his voice. She let him go. She stood in the driveway with Sophia pressed against her side and watched the car go down the tree-lined street until it was around the corner and gone. And then she stood there a little while longer in the August heat, just being a mother whose child had left for something better than what they'd started with. Sophia said, "He's going to be okay." "Yeah, baby, he really is." That Tuesday evening, just another Tuesday, 2 months after Marco had gone, Rosa stood in the kitchen doorway with coffee and watched the light in the house. Sophia was at the floor of the living room with her drawing pad, designing what she explained was a community center with a library inside it and a room where kids could make art. She was using a ruler now, measuring angles, getting the proportions deliberate. Ms. Avila had taught her about scale. The October evening was coming in through the windows, the kind of light that made everything look considered, like the house itself was paying attention. Rosa looked at the room, at her daughter's bent head and her careful hands, and the colored pencils scattered in a radius around her. At the walls they had painted together in the early spring, Sophia choosing the colors, Rosa applying them. 2 afternoons that had smelled of paint and sounded like Sophia's commentary on what each color felt like as a room. At the east-facing kitchen window behind Rosa, where the morning light would come in tomorrow, the way it came in every morning, sideways and warm, falling across the table where she had sat with Tio Varo's second letter and understood, finally, what she was holding. She thought about the parking lot, about the granola bar split in half, and the coffee that was barely brown, and the condensation on the inside of the windshield in the morning. About Sophia drawing houses on the backs of grocery receipts, and Marco counting miles on the road, and the specific, crushing weight of a situation you cannot fix by trying harder, which is the situation that breaks most people, which had not broken her, which had been, she could see this now from the far side of it, the very quality that Tio Varo had been watching for when she thought about what he had built, not the bonds and the stones and the certificates, the thing beneath them, the belief that enduring value existed in places the world had decided not to look. That patience was the one investment strategy that required no expertise, only discipline. That the most undervalued things were often the ones the world had simply failed to examine. She thought, he bought this, not the house, not the trust. This specific Tuesday evening with the October light and Sophia's ruler and the oak in the yard and the coffee going warm in my hands. This ordinary, extraordinary, permanent evening. This is what 50 years of patience bought. She set the coffee down on the kitchen counter and went to sit beside her daughter on the floor. Sophia moved over without looking up and making room in the automatic way of children who know you are welcome before you have even asked. "What are you building?" Rosa said. "A place where people can be safe," Sophia said. She did not look up from the ruler. "And comfortable. And stay." Rosa looked at the drawing, the community center with its library and its art room and its careful proportions, the windows Sophia had placed to let the light come in from the right direction. "Show me how the light works," she said. Sophia put her pencil down and picked up a yellow one and began to draw the lines of it, where the sun would come through each window at what time of day, and what it would fall on, and what it would make warm. And Rosa sat with her daughter on the floor of their home and watched her show her how light moved through the things we build, and understood, and with the complete and unhurried certainty of something finally and permanently arrived at, that this was what perseverance looked like from the inside. Not triumph, not vindication, though those had come. Just this. Just the ordinary evening. Just the daughter with the ruler. Just the oak in the yard. Just the permanence of what you build when you refuse. Across all the years of it being the harder choice, to let go. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.